So today, my dear friends, I want to talk about love and how it's portrayed in Genshin, both officially and unofficially. I want to talk about this because love is both very absent and also very present in Genshin. It's absent from most playable characters in the game, but there are lots and lots of fan art and fan fiction about Genshin characters. It's always been so intriguing to me how a game with very little romance can have such an intense and very passionate fandom for so many different ships. And the opposite side of that spectrum, we have the people who could not give less of a fuck about romance in this game, because at the end of the day, the story is about the traveler trying to find their sibling. Now, before we start, I have a disclaimer. Genshin is the only gacha game I've had the most exposure to, so I can't really draw comparisons to any other gacha game. I'm sorry. And if you're new here, I'm also not a professional video essayist. I just like to talk about things, and this is mostly my opinion. This is not well structured at all, so if you're here for that, you can leave. But if you're staying, you're free to disagree with my opinions, as long as you do it nicely. We don't like mean people here. Let's start with the very basics, the foundation, and how Genshin objectively portrays romance. Obviously, there are different kinds of love that's present in Genshin. There's platonic love, sibling love, and if you squint, you'll find romantic love. Genshin is unique because despite having so many characters, there's just this weird absence of romantic love from its playable characters. I don't know if that's the case for all gacha games, but from what I've gathered looking around the internet, a lot of the romance in gacha games, especially ones revolving around the protagonist of the game, is bait at best, which is also something that we see in Genshin. And other than the traveler or the protagonist, the playable characters also have very little to no romantic storylines, at least up until this point. They have chemistry, they have interactions, but nothing really canon, like the game will not commit to these things. They can show it on screen, but no commitment. But why? Romance is one of the most beloved tropes in the world. It's not everyone's favorite, but it is beloved, if not the most beloved. Romance is in every media that we consume. It's in songs, in movies, in shows, and of course, it's in video games. Hell, some gacha games are completely centered around romance, and we have the entire otome game genre. So then why is it often absent in gacha games like Genshin? Is it simply because the story shouldn't be about anything else other than the traveler finding their twin, and Genshin being a gacha game, so hoping for any canonical romance in the game is wishful thinking? Let's talk about why romance is often absent in gacha games. It's unfair to say that it's completely absent in Genshin specifically, because there are plenty of NPC love stories and narratives that allude to a romantic connection between characters. The one that is missing is just between the traveler and, the playable characters. But NPCs, it's all there, and some are pretty intriguing actually. But before that, let's talk about the traveler first. There are several things that I think added to the absence of canon romance in Genshin and maybe gacha in general. The biggest one, and probably the most obvious one, would be how it affects player agency. The way Genshin was set up with the traveler, Aether, and Lumine, both are meant to be silent protagonists. And what I mean by that is that the traveler is purposely kept blink enough to serve as a self-insert for players who want to see them that way, but they also have just a bit of personality traits and a background story that also makes them feel like they're an actual character and not a completely blank slate. Genshin's protagonist is already in that limbo where it wants to give the player some sense of player agency, but it's also restrictive enough to let it be only an illusion of control. This can be seen in how we have dialogue options, but it's really just a sentence split into two. The game wants you to feel like you're interacting with, the game and the characters, and that your choices matter, but it's also blatantly obvious that they don't really matter at all. Player agency is very important in gacha games like Genshin because it serves as a direct incentive for players to pull on certain characters. Like, let's be real here, you probably know someone who prefers Aether or Lumine with specific characters, like at least romantically, and just the idea of having those two together on the same team probably acts like a mini incentive for those people to pull for whatever character they prefer to be with the traveler. Commonly, this is referred to as someone's husbando or waifu. So if the game erases that illusion of choice by giving the protagonist or the traveler a canon love interest, then it would probably kill whatever fantasy they had, which kills the fun for a lot of people, or at least a big chunk of people who play gacha games for the fantasy of, being with their favorite character. After all, the main reason that people play gacha games is to, other than enjoy the gameplay, is usually because they like the characters and they want to pull for them. New characters are released every so often, and they are released with the hopes that the player base will find find them interesting and develop emotional attachment and pull for them. Having the protagonist be in a canonical, continuous relationship with another character that was released a while ago, like a while back, will make it harder for the player base to form an attachment to the newer characters. And Hoyo will not like that. And personally, in my opinion, while a character can have interesting design and cool lore, great gameplay, it's the emotional attachment that gets people to actually pull and even spend money to get them. Obviously, this is not a blanket statement. I cannot say this is the case for every single player out there, but that's how it is for me, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. There's just no real benefits in having a canonical relationship with the Traveler specifically, and interestingly enough, other than it being a fantasy blocker for some of the player base, there's also a large chunk of players who are just not interested in a romance storyline involving the Traveler. From what I've read online, like just going around the internet, some players see Genshin as an adventure game and the main story is about the Traveler trying to find their twin and is navigating through the strange world of Teyvat. Romance is just not the story that they're looking for, and to their credit, I can see having the Traveler being in a romantic storyline while also trying to focus on finding their twin be a bit contradictive, so I'm not gonna discredit that take. And there are also already a lot of romance or dating sim games out there anyway, so why put an unnecessary romance storyline in the game like Genshin? And again, I think that's a completely fair take, but a gacha game like Genshin will always try to appeal with some of its characters, towards the Traveler, because some players do see themselves as the Traveler, and you gotta have your waifus and your husbandos. And I think it's very clear how they do this. They do this with the Traveler by having some moments of tension or hinted romance, sometimes completely out of the blue, most notably with Ayaka, Xiao, Citlali. I don't remember who else, but I think these three are the most prominent. Like, it's pretty clear that some characters, not all, have a bit of a crush on the Traveler. And again, to their credit, the Traveler is cool. They're a cool character, they're strong, they're nice enough to help out most of the characters in the game. So I can understand some characters having a crush on them, like who be falling head over heels over a blonde Traveler from another world. I get it, I get the appeal. Do I personally like this type of narrative where the Traveler is just basically collecting incomplete love interests? Personally, no. But given the way Genshin functions as a game and how it tries to sell its main products, which are the characters, I get it. Now, I think the reason behind the absence of romance in playable characters is pretty similar. I mean, if your favorite character is already in a canon relationship with another playable character, it would kind of kill the fun for some people just because of like your own preference and how you see that character. Also, there's always just a risk of players not liking two specific characters together. For example, one of Genshin's most popular ships is Zhongli and Child. Now, not taking into consideration how plausible that is in a Chinese game, and this ship might not be your cup of tea because you just prefer those characters to be with a different character, or you just don't like their dynamic, or you just prefer them to not be in relationships. But the point is, people have so many different preferences, and having a canon relationship or characters that Hoyo needs to sell will make it harder for Hoyo to market these characters. Having different preferences is just completely fine. I think that's the main appeal of ships in general for everyone. Like, there's different dynamics. There's something for everyone. And not liking ships or care about them is also a preference. I personally like ships, like disclaimer. I'm a casual enjoyer. I like seeing the dynamics between characters, and it doesn't even have to be like a romantic dynamic. I and probably a lot of other people enjoy seeing two characters interact and form a bond with each other. That's the main appeal for me, regardless if it's platonic or romantic. Interesting dynamics makes an interesting story, in my opinion. And an example for me in Genshin, I personally really like Hu Tao and Zhongli's relationship. Not in a romantic sense, but I like the idea of Zhongli being an Archon in disguise, and Hu Tao is just onto him the entire time, but they both pretend that she is oblivious. I think that's a very fun dynamic to follow. I like seeing them interact on screen. I also really like Nahida and the Wanderer's dynamic, especially since we got to see that unfold on screen. Their relationship or friendship is directly linked to both their character growth, and that's why I find it so interesting. The Wanderer was even the main antagonist in the Sumeru Archon quest. He was one of the villains who tried to kill Nahida and even tried to replace her as the god of Sumeru. And Nahida, despite her younger age in comparison to the other Archons, was able to show her benevolence and wisdom through her treatment of the Wanderer. Again, probably because she's the goddess of wisdom. This is seen in the interlude quest where she basically tries to guide him towards the truth about his past and how the Torre has screwed him over. She could have punished him for what he did or abandoned him because she really had no obligation in helping him learn the truth anyway, but she did. And that's why I really like their platonic relationship in Genshin. I like them as a duo. It makes the story feel more believable and the characters feel more alive. This is just an example of a non-romantic pod. Romantic relationships or dynamics, we don't really have that, like I said, but is it necessary? Not really. I think romance in a game like Genshin should really just be optional so that it doesn't feel out of place. But I do think having important characters, in this case playable characters, have, you know, like relationships with one another can add a lot to the story. We've already established that a non-romantic dynamic can add a lot already, but imagine having two characters having a romantic storyline or dynamic. It's not necessary, but it's also just something different. You can explore different dynamics in a romantic storyline or romantic dynamic than you do in a platonic one because they're just different. It just opens up a lot of doors in storytelling. Now in Genshin, I think we've actually already have a lot of stories that are interesting that includes a romantic dynamic, but they mostly revolve around NPCs. For example, we have Roslyn and Rostam. Her grief over his death during the Cataclysm is the reason why she became the Crimson Witch of Flames, and the Jester found her, and that's how she became our beloved Signora. We also have Glory and Godwin. Glory is the NPC in Mondstadt waiting for Godwin, her lover, who's supposedly on a expedition with Varka, but we soon discovered that he's not actually on that expedition because he somehow missed it. There's also Vlad and Nadia. I think this is one of the more fun NPC romances. They're guards of the Northland Bank, one of them on the day shift and the other on the night shift, and they finally had their meetup during the Lantern Rite. I remember a lot of players being excited for that one small payoff of them just meeting, like the meeting of two star-crossed NPCs. They finally get a chance to meet off their shift and during the biggest festival in Liyue. For more recent examples, spoilers for Act 3 and 4 of the Not Krai Archon quest, we have Rarier and Talindis. Their romantic relationship is quite literally the foundation of the entire plot for those two acts of the Archon quest. The writers actually used their relationship as the main tool to develop Rarier as a villain. It's a pretty tragic tale, right? How Rarier is someone tasked with doing something very horrible, unspeakable, and it turns out that Talindis, his would-be fiancé, is someone he actually needs to kill. Vidafolnir even warned him that they are a match made in hell, but to Rarier, someone doing something very inhumane for a living and is basically desensitized to it, his relationship with Talindis is ironically the only window of normalcy that he has. We see throughout the quest how Rarier doesn't actually desire glory or visions of the future or the power to create life like the other sinners. He only wants to be a nobody, as he and Talindis would put it. He wants a normal life and to be pardoned, for him and Talindis to be pardoned. His goal is just to get married to the woman who makes him happy and to live out the fantasy of having a normal life. She in a way represents the only humanity left in him. I also think it's intentional that Rarier only grew horrified by his own job once he realizes that he has to neutralize Talindis, his beloved, and in the quest to get himself and Talindis pardoned by the Vinstar King, who is asking Rarier, you know, to basically neutralize a lot of innocent people. The game gave a very human moment of Rarier, and what I mean by human isn't him being heroic or, you know, like a heartless villain. He's just selfish. I mean, the other sinners are also very selfish, but they have this desire for glory and something bigger. While Rarier actually shows an emotion that I think is very realistic for someone like him. Basically, he says that he's not interested in saving Kandria or the world or the greater good. He doesn't care. He just wants to escape with the woman that he loves, and he only cares about something or realizes how awful it is when it affects him directly. That's a very human trait. We tend to live in ignorance and convince ourselves that we are just doing what we are told, again, willingly ignorant about the repercussions, until of course it directly affects the people that we love, or if it affects our lives. Love, desperation, helplessness, and ignorance are all very common human emotions that we ourselves have probably experienced in our lives, which is interesting because that's what they managed to portray for Rarier through his love story with Thalindis. I mean, the whole thing also established Rarier as a monster, of course, a tragic monster, but a monster nonetheless. As Nefer would put it, as a character, it gives him a lot of depth. It gives the players insight towards what was going on in his mind and how he became the monster that we see today without making him feel like a complete comic book villain, because his motivations is survival for himself and for his loved one, which again is probably one of the most relatable motivations that you can write in a villain. Most of us just wants to survive, like most humans do. The only reason he went with Dainsleif to storm the Winster King's palace is to obtain a pardon for Thalindis and himself so they could have a normal life. Something that in hindsight is very absurd, like he was very delusional if he thinks he can get pardoned, but it is an understandable yet selfish wish for him to have as a character. This of course doesn't happen, and ultimately his love for Thalindis is the reason he fell into the temptation of the abyss alongside the other sinners of Conria. It's shocking to most characters, like even Dane was confused as to why a man who seemingly had no grand ambitions in his life suddenly fell into one of the most corrupt power sources in the universe, and he was driven by one very strong emotion: love. And that is what I mean when having a romantic dynamic or storyline can open a lot of doors for storytelling, like dramatic storytelling. And we do have that in NPCs. Like, I don't think Rare is gonna be playable. I would be surprised if he is, but I don't think he is. Come on, let's be real. And unfortunately, these kind of stories and relationship dynamics, like romantic relationship dynamics, is what is missing from playable characters. We have plenty of interesting and complex platonic relationship dynamics between playable characters. So then why does it matter that we don't really have a solid canon and developed romantic relationship between them? Well, because it affects the story in different ways. We already talked about Rarier and the many things that you can do with a romantic storyline, but I'm gonna expand on what I meant by that more here. While you have an abundance of platonic dynamics, especially found family dynamics, the narrative value that you get between characters that's given in platonic relationship versus romantic ones are different. They also affect and shape a character in different ways. While platonic relationships can be complex and deep, they often highlight traits like loyalty to a cause or a sense of justice, empathy, solidarity, vulnerability, and showing belonging in a sense of community. These are highly valuable traits to show when you are, trying to highlight character traits or growth and tell a story in a video game or in any media actually. But a romantic relationship offers something a bit different. It can show loyalty, empathy, and vulnerability like platonic ones, but the intensity of that emotion will be significantly higher due to the exclusive nature of it being a romantic relationship. For example, a character can be vulnerable to multiple friends, but if a character reveals who they really are, like on the inside, who they are as a person, completely naked in the soul, to one exclusive person, or if it's an open romantic relationship, then maybe to a couple select few, then that vulnerability transcends into what would be considered intimacy. The intensity and stakes are different, and the potential narrative conflicts are also different. There's power in heartbreak. It's probably one of the most intense universal emotions a human can feel. Again, the best example of this is just Rarier. He's in a romantic relationship with Thalindis. He wants to spend his whole life with her and only her. Hence, when it's revealed that he's been keeping a massive secret from her, especially one so horrible, it feels like a very intense betrayal. And that level of intensity from a romantic dynamic can add a lot of nuance and depth for a character. It's not the only tool to add nuance and depth, but it sure is effective. Other than intensity, seeing characters pursue a romantic relationship sometimes gives a sense of payoff, especially when it's executed in stages. We see this with the NPCs, Vlad and Nadia. The sense of payoff was definitely there, even though it was like just a small detail when they finally met during the Lantern Rite. Having some playable characters have canonical romantic relationships can also add a sense of character agency. Choosing someone to be your partner partner is just human behavior. And having characters do that will just make them feel more human, more alive. Like they go around, like they have relationships with other characters, and not just platonic ones, they also have romantic ones. They may have ex-girlfriends, ex-boyfriends, and that kind of agency is just human behavior. It makes them feel believable as humans. And if you've ever watched any of my videos, you would know that I believe making a character feel human is always a good thing, because otherwise they would feel like a caricature or a stereotype, and those always ruin a good story, especially when they're not utilized well. One of the limitations that Genshin has, in my opinion, is how some characters can feel like commodity that they're trying to sell to the players, and this is purely due to the nature of the gacha mechanics and having it rely on people spending on characters. So I get that they have to make a lot of the characters, the playable ones, appealing to a lot of people, to most people if possible, because the more people they appeal to means there are more people who would spend, hence more profits. It's not evil, it's just how the business model works, but it is a shame because it does pose a limitation on how they can write certain characters. So they're meant to appeal, they're meant to fulfill certain headcanons or fantasies, and the price that has to be paid with those decisions makes the characters feel flatter narratively. Not that they're bad, just not living up to their full potential, especially when you think about how they have backstories. Some are very detailed, by the way, and Genshin's world building, it's just a lot of potential that's not being realized here. Does this ruin the game? No. Like I said, I think these things like romantic storylines and whatnot are always best when they're intended to be a part of the plot or a character's story. The pseudo-incomplete romance that we get between the traveler and some of the playable characters can make a narrative feel less cohesive, purely because there's no character arc involved in the relationship that's shown on screen. Like the bond that's shown on screen doesn't really do anything. I'm not saying that this is applicable for all of the traveler slash playable character relationship or hinted relationship, but some can definitely feel like they're just there to please and not really to do anything else, not to add narrative value, not for character growth, but purely just for fantasy fulfillment. I'm using Rarier again as an example because his love story was there to further enhance and highlight the gravity of his choices and how he became one of the 5 sinners of Khandria. So it's there with a very clear intention. Another thing that happens is that playable characters aren't allowed to commit or have lasting decisions involving other characters. At least, again, not romantically. And in some ways, with the traveler also, they're just left with this very ambiguous kind of platonic, kind of romantic bond that's never really deep enough, but they're also trying to sell as special. So it just kind of sits in this weird limbo of being kind of fan service and also something with substance. Is it a crime? Again, no. But I would rather see the relationships between characters and also the traveler. Like if they are going to have a very special and very strong bond with each other and it's done with intention, I would love to see that, because what happens when a bond becomes developed and strong is that it affects the character. Ideally, you know, like we as humans are molded by our relationships, by our partners, our friends, and it's always nice to see that. So yeah, personally, I don't like when it feels too fan servicey. Listen, I get why it's there. I'm not going to complain about the existence of fan service in a gacha game. I don't mind it usually, but the purpose of fan service isn't to add narrative value. It's to make the players feel closer and attached to the character, especially if the player uses the traveler as a self-insert in the way that they experience the game. And this is important because not everyone plays the game like this. That's why fan service can feel very flat to some players while it can be completely charming to others. Personally, for me, I don't get attached when a character that I like flirts with the traveler because I don't see myself as the traveler, and I don't think the traveler has enough substance as a character to, you know, carry a believable emotional dynamic, because while they have their moments as a standalone character, they're also left blank enough so that anyone can relate to them. Again, this is not traveler hate. I think they've been doing a better job in recent Archon quests, but it's just a lot easier for me to be attached to characters whose stories are relatable or at the very least have an interesting character arc or growth throughout the story. Since we've just covered how Genshin officially portrays romance, let's talk about how it's unofficially portrayed. I will try not to open a can of worms when it comes to fandom and shipping, but it has always bothered me why shipping fictional characters can be so intense for some people. Like at the end of the day, these are not real people. These are just fictional fictional characters. And this is not exclusive to Genshin, like the intensity has been around for a very long time. But despite all that, I hope everyone here can be civil when talking about their preferred ships, or even if you dislike the idea of shipping or romance in Genshin. Everyone just has different preferences and different ways of enjoying the characters, dynamics, and stories when it comes to media. And it's no different for video games. I think the player base are usually split into two. On one half, we have the extremely invested, and on the other half, we have the I genuinely don't care. I just want to play my RPG in peace without unnecessary romance popping up where it doesn't belong. I think if you've been on the internet long enough, shipping culture is just a natural part of fandom and media. And having so many characters, all of them complete with their own backstory, personalities, and lore, Genshin offers a lot of different character dynamics that appeals to a lot of different people. So basically, it's a treasure trove of materials to work with. I know people who like to ship Zhongli and Child, Jin and Diluc, the Traveler and Xiao, the Traveler and Ayaka, the Traveler and Child, Tignari and Sino, Tignari and Alhaitham. There's absolutely everything for everyone. And when a player or someone is massively invested in these characters, in their lore, their dynamic, they will make a lot of fan content. And sometimes these players make multiple works just because they like the dynamic that they see in the game. And since there's no romantic dynamic, they're basically fed nothing by the game. And because they're fed nothing by the game, they basically have to cook the meal themselves. I like to call this the outsourcing of romance in Genshin. Sometimes that's just what needs to be done, you know? The game won't commit to exploring the potential that's obviously there, so you just gotta make one up for yourself. And honestly, if you just block out the unreasonably intense ones, you'll have a pretty good time, especially if you like exploring character dynamics and people's interpretation of it, which I want to talk about. I'm gonna take an example of Child. Now, some people might see him as a diabolical man who is out for blood and who is obsessed with stirring chaos as long as he gets a good fight. They see him as a villain, which is actually one aspect of his character. That's not all he is, but some people like this chaotic character more than they like the nice older brother slash family man that's also part of his character. So some people might portray Child as a chaotic harbinger more in their art or fan fiction, but if you don't see Child that way, then there are plenty of artworks that appreciate his more human side. They enjoy seeing him do mundane things with his siblings, or just doing random things with the Traveler or the people of Liyue, or whoever really it's fiction. And there are also people who like to see the characters portrayed more or less accurately. They don't like one side of the character's personality being exaggerated, and maybe they also prefer that the characters are treated with more nuance in their own fan works. If you don't with ships and fandoms and all of the drama that comes with it, that's fine. I completely understand. But since you're here, let me explain why some people can enjoy romance or the idea of a romantic storyline, even in media where it's not canonically present. I personally enjoy a lot of character dynamics, therefore I am not ashamed to admit that I consume a lot of fanfiction and fan art back in the day. Nowadays it's more just fan art, but you get the idea. I like fan works. I just ignore all of the drama because again, these are fictional characters. But anyway, I treat the outsourcing of romance and headcanons as well just extended media. It's like a spin-off of a game that I like that I don't really take seriously. I can just see a fan art and see an interpretation of this dynamic from the artist's point of view. Or when it's fanfiction, it's just fun to imagine and read about the characters that I love in a different universe, in a random setting like where they're magically roommates, or in ridiculous scenarios like the classic, oh no, there's only one bed. I promise you there are plenty of intriguing and complex stories being written by fanfiction authors. There are ones with world building and authors who pay very close attention to detail in keeping the characters true to who they are in the game. But there are also those who just want to reimagine these characters from a game that they love so much. I mean, you gotta be pretty invested in the damn game if you're spending hours on fan art or writing an entire light novel about the characters from the game. And in my opinion, this fan culture also helps keep the attachment alive for games like Genshin. When all you get from the game is pseudo flirting or ambiguous bonds between characters, sometimes you need something else to keep the imagination going, to finally see your favorite dynamic or relationship living up to its potential. Hence the outsourcing of romance from the game to the fandom. There's also something for everyone. Like any character you can think of at the top of your head, there's fan art or fan fictions about that character. That's not always a good thing because we have literal child characters, but we live in an unfortunate reality where some people are freaks. But anyway, fan art or fan fiction aren't always about ships or or have to be romantic. I won't deny that romantic fan content is the majority, but sometimes there are fan art or fan fictions that's dedicated to platonic relationships too. Fan art is obviously most common. You can easily find like Zhonglian Hu Tao, The Wanderer and Nahida, Albedo and Klee. Those are usually portrayed as platonic, and I hope for the love of God that the last one is always portrayed as platonic. And they exist because players are invested in their relationship in the game. But it's really not a surprise that the majority of fan content are about romance because it's the only thing that's available. Like I said, they're fed nothing, so they have to cook themselves. I personally think this is not harmful. It's actually good because it's optional and it keeps the emotional investment going with the characters. It serves as a great alternative to the devs who can't really commit to canonical romance for reasons we've already discussed. Now, I think some players can disagree though. Maybe the players who don't want to see romance in games like Genshin can translate it to like, I just don't want to see a romantic storyline that's forced. Why are you forcing this on me when it's not even canon? Which is again completely fair, but that distaste comes from something feeling forced. And that is something that I can relate to. It's one of the reasons why I don't like ambiguous romances in the first place, especially ones that pops out of nowhere or has too much ass kissing for the traveler. I can see the potential of some character dynamics, hence why I can enjoy fan content, but if it's like constantly shoved in my face, it can get a little annoying, especially when it's not canon, hence why it's optional. We should never force people to like certain ships or certain dynamics and claim that it's the one true portrayal because these things are optional. The outsourcing are optional. The game is ambiguous for a reason. And this does happen in video games, not just gacha, but for Genshin, I can see some players be bothered by the multiple playable characters that's suddenly very open or developing a random crush on the traveler. And another point is that I think I can understand the people who are bothered by the harem or the number of characters that are developing a crush on the traveler. That might seem random. Now you can think this is natural for some characters to start developing a crush towards the traveler because they're kind, they're cool, and they're helpful. I'm personally cool with this. Like sure, I can see some characters having a crush, but for them to portray that the traveler is suddenly so important to these characters is a bit hard to believe. But that all depends on how much the game actually wants to invest time in making the depth of the bond believable. So what is the point of this rant actually? What is the point of this video? I honestly just wanted to talk about ships and shipping culture because it's something that I enjoy casually and consume from time to time. And while having no romance in Genshin is fine, having all of its playable characters tied to ambiguous platonic relationships for the sake of, you know, keeping options open and believable for all players is a missed potential. There's just so many great and interesting characters with complex dynamics. So imagine what Genshin can cook up with these characters if they didn't have the limitations that they have placed on themselves because, you know, gacha models. In the game, players are drip-fed romantic hints, and most of the development or realizations of these dynamics are completely outsourced to the fandom. And whether or not you think romance belongs in the game like Genshin is completely up to you. Maybe you like the current approach where the game just give hints, or maybe you're more like me and wish to see these characters going through growth and development through relationships, which also includes romantic ones. Personally, I think it would be fun if they can just have some characters be in a canonical romantic relationship. Hence why I want to mention one specific character. This character is very highly anticipated, and she is the only one who's implied to be married because she has a child, like an actual child. So we haven't seen a lot of Alice other than in cameos, which was mostly just her voice for many years. But since she's going to be more prominent in the game soon, and there are materials in the game mentioning both Klee's mom and dad as adventurers, I'm very curious to see how they would handle her marriage if she's still together with her husband. I hope that it's at least some part of her character story, like regardless if she's now a hot single mom or still happily married to Klee's dad, having a child and a family should at least be a big part of her character, and you know, her significant other should be a part of that equation in some way. I personally would prefer if we get some interactions between Alice and her husband, or if she's single now, I hope that we at least get some context as to why they separated. I feel like it would make her a much more layered and interesting character than if it's just never mentioned at all, or if it turns out Klee is conceived in a different way, like, you know, that doesn't require a partner. I don't know, I hope that we, at the very least, don't pull off crazy stunts like that. But yeah, I think that's all I have to say on romance in Genshin. understand it has a lot of potential, but due to it being a gacha game by nature, I do understand its limitations when it comes to character development and narrative cohesion, but I still hope that at least there will be some exceptions applied to playable characters in the future. Doesn't have to be all of the characters, but if it fits the story and done with intention, why the hell not? I think it could be great. So to answer my own useless question, I don't think hoping for a romantic storyline in a game like Genshin is wishful thinking. We're all free to do so. Like, we can have our own headcanons and understand the limitations of what the game can offer, but still enjoy it in our own way. And I also agree that the plot of the game should be focused on the traveler finding their twin. Having a forced romance filler arc would just drive away so many people, especially if the players don't like the potential love interest for the traveler. So yeah, I think that's it. I've ranted enough about this for now. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you not give a shit? But thank you also so much for watching and making it this far. It means a lot to me. I hope you guys are doing well. Since you're here, might as well subscribe. If not, that's also okay. I hope you guys are having a great day, and I've been enjoying Not Cry a lot. I really like the Archon quest, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye!